Now I'm going to hit. All right, so welcome everybody. I'm really excited to welcome our trainer for capital campaigns, insights, ideas, and impediments, Robert Patterson. He's got a quick PowerPoint that he is going to share with us. And then we are going to have hear from a really great panel of folks who will share their on the ground real world experience with capital campaigns. And I will introduce them later after Robert gives his shares his wisdom with us. But for now, I'm going to kick it over to Robert. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And let me share my screen and see if the technology gods are with us today. Everybody can see that? Yes. All right, good. So I want to share this this is social settlement on the left side when we were building our building in 1964 at 49th and Q, and then this year at 48th and Q. So I kind of want to share that as one, it's kind of nice symmetry, two, to kind of show capital campaigns can happen. And coincidentally, it's Boyd Jones trucks in both pictures that are doing this. So I thought that was kind of a nice historical rhyming there. So let me get to the next picture here. So Rosie's going to help me with this poll. Do I need to stop sharing, Rosie, or does this go over? Okay, so one, just kind of get a sense of where everybody's at. Either I've got this covered, I don't know why I'm here, but I feel pretty confident, but I have a few questions. You know what you have to get started, but you know there's a lot to learn, or this is my very first capital campaign help. So, and in full transparency, I live in any one of these on any given day, so. So it looks like we got mostly first capital campaign. So congratulations, this was my first capital campaign too. So as I said, I'll kind of share what I've learned along the way and some potholes and everything, obstacles to avoid. So I think we can move beyond that. Can everybody see that? Or do I need to share that, Rosie?
I've shared it and I've taken it down. So if you're still seeing it, you can X out.
All right, good jobs. All right, so a couple things I wanted to share. So some of these slides, you'll see this Indiana University. So I took a 2-day course managing the capital campaign. It's a little expensive, but I thought it was well worth it. And I took it about early on as we were getting ready for a campaign. So people recognize them as part of the fundraising school, or you've taken that 5-day program. So there's a lot of good stuff in there, so I do recommend it. So I kind of blatantly stole from them. So if you see that logo at the bottom, that's where I'm kind of stealing from. So, so some of the essential campaign practices that, and this is really kind of textbook, this is how you do it. Sequential solicitation on when you ask, who you're asking first, getting those lead gifts, how you involve the volunteers, number of, quality over quantity, face-to-face solicitation, which was not easy to do in the past year, or just we were not able to do, and multi-year pledges. So sometimes we have a lot of grants that are multi-years, but rarely do we have individual gifts that are multi-year. So some of these are kind of new to me as we did a capital campaign. Some of the elements, so on the left-hand side, this is really what we're going to be concentrating on today, and some of the other stuff will kind of come later, but we'll talk about some objectives, the case for support, that's kind of your primary tool, establishing that preliminary number for budget, gift range chart, which was really helpful for me to figure out how much can we raise in this landscape and based on who we currently have supporting our organization. The other step, kind of the phase 2, these are important pieces to have, but it's kind of once the campaign's underway, how are you recognizing donors? Do you have the policies to figure this out? How are you going to solicit them? The methods, what's your actual timetable, and so forth. So we'll touch on a lot of these today. But first I want to go with the case or the case statement. So what I like most about the key word here is investment. And when you're asking for big dollars, 20 times what you're normally asking a funder for, this is an investment, saying, this is invest for the next few decades, or a couple of decades for a building or whatever it happens to be. So they really want to make sure that they're putting their money in something that will be prosperous. Of course, the case statement should answer the basic questions. It should be supportable, defensible. What's the impact on the community? I like the emotional and rational. We have to pull to the heartstrings of people, but we also have a lot of numbers people that they want to see both. So it kind of needs to kind of live in both worlds. I like that it says optimistic, because if you have a half-hearted campaign, people are going to sniff that out and they're just like, yeah. I'm like, even you have to think, I think we're going to be able to do this. You really need to show that we are going to be able to do this. So I think that's important. That being said, include all this, but be brief and easy to remember. So there was a lot of editing that went along the way, and move people to action. You'll see, I'm going to share our quiet phase statement and our public phase statement, and you'll kind of see we actually did not have a move people to action or an action call in our quiet phase, but I will share that now. So this, and I realize it might look a little smaller screen, but I want to kind of give a quick overview of what our quiet phase statement looked like. So obviously we have a pretty picture here. We always lead with our mission. And then you kind of see all these things that when we met, we're saying, why are we doing what we do? And why is this building important? And so we kind of came up with these core learning objectives, and we started to figure out like where they kind of bubble up. And obviously we talked about hands-on learning, engagement, and then social emotional learning. And so this is kind of where we felt that was kind of our sweet spot. So when I talk about numbers, so here's our current capacity and here's our new capacity with the new building. So we try to make it pretty clear, and obviously big numbers, big graphics, crystal clear for early childhood and out of school, just to show the little bit difference. Our existing site and where our new site is going to be. So we try to make it pretty simple. So if you're just going to look at the pictures, as we sometimes do, this is kind of tells you the story. But in here, and I'm not sure how easy it is, but you can also see some more details, like here's the site acreage size, here's the current zoning, here's the acquisition process. So pretty pictures, but also all the details that you would need going into there. We did some sample rooms just to give a little, here's what a STEM room can look like. Here's what the gym will look like. Here's what an early childhood would look like, as well as how it lays out on the land and where the parking is and all those other things. And then same thing, we put some details in the middle. Here's the square footage of the building. Here's the number of classrooms. Here's kind of why this new site is important. And I always kind of call these the beauty shots, which is really, to me, kind of what sells the building. It's like, what's it actually going to look like? And so this was a version, of course, as those have gone through campaigns before, it changes weekly on little details and so forth, but this is what it looked like at the time. All right, so that was our quiet phase. I'm going to take a slight detour to kind of talk about how Indiana University talks about the phase. So you can see a lot of it, half of it happens in the quiet phase. So this is before the public even knows anything about it. So the campaign planning, and I'll share our timeline in just a moment. But this is where you really go after all those lead gifts and the insider gifts, the major gifts, the foundations, kind of all that is done before. And then these don't quite line up, but public announcement is kind of the start here. So that's when you are starting work on some of the major gifts beforehand, but once that announcement is made, that's when you see all the campaigns saying, hey, we're raising money for this, and you have your groundbreaking and all that. And of course the celebration and move-in phase. So this was our timeline, and I'm not going to go through every detail, but I want to share a couple things and show kind of early on, we did look at our current facility because one, we need to say, should we stay here? What would it take to get this building, back up to where you want to be? And then we realized that while we could make this building work for us and be better, it didn't increase our square footage or capacity. So we decided early on that we needed to do something else. So we did a growth strategy report, and a couple things that we did for this. One, to show that there was a market for our programs. Funders could be asking, like, what else is out there? Are you the only ones, or is it a childcare desert or what have you? So these are the things that we kind of looked at. So 2017, this is where we really began doing our visioning. And we did hire an architect at the time to kind of help us lead it. And so you see pretty early on, we had different visioning sessions. So we included funders if they wanted to, advisory council, board members, community leaders, everybody, different focus groups to say, help us kind of figure out where we want to be or what would kind of work. So This helped in a number of ways because one, they kind of got a sneak peek of where we're going, and funders especially, they already had some buy-in, and they knew going in, it's like, oh, here's what Kids Can is doing, and hopefully in their mind, they're kind of also kind of like, oh, here's, we're going to be getting this ask at some point. So, but they appreciated being kind of in on the early stages. Some funders just said no, they didn't want to have any possible conflict of interest, which is fine. But it was a good mix, and it really helped us kind of land on, here's the things that are that we're kind of hitting. Here's things that really confused people. Here's things people got really excited about. So that was helpful. You can kind of see we did pretty quickly did our owner's rep. So kind of best practices is get that owner's rep in early to kind of help you along. They speak the language more than I do, as I know Jaymes probably can attest to with constructions and some stuff to make sure we keep us in line. We also chose our construction management well before we even got to that point because we wanted them at the table. So we're discussing some big change, and it could be out of the budget or kind of out of the scope, or that's just not possible. We wanted somebody there to say, hey, that's not going to work before we kind of go down that path. So that was really helpful for us. During the campaign part, you can see that in 2019, we began to finalize the budget, started meeting with donors. We were fortunate to get our lead gifts secured early. And then we began to do, you can see all the fun stuff, that due diligence for land testing, city planning, zoning, and so forth, all the stuff that needs to be done. But we also use that time to start meeting with our foundations, our key supporters. And you can see we purchased our land. So 2020, unsurprisingly, we had a dramatic pause for COVID. And that some stuff paused and some stuff we still worked on. We did use that time to begin to right size our budget. We continued meeting with funders, obviously not in person, so we try to be creative about that. So it moved our timeline a little bit, but by 2021 spring, we were at the stage where we could have the public announcement, which we did in the spring, finalize the site designs, and then we did our groundbreaking in the fall. And hopefully a year from now, we should be at move-in time. So fingers crossed for good weather and no supply chain issues. So I just want to kind of share that timeline to kind of give you that nothing happens overnight. And then typical nonprofit way, I take everything ×3 for how much time you think it's going to take versus the reality. So for our public phase, this is kind of our case statement, and this is not all the pages, but I just kind of want to share a few of them. So you can kind of see this looks a little bit different than our original case statement. So we had a name for it, the Getting Gear, a letter from me, and the thinnest picture I could find. So we do show, I always call these beauty shots, like, you know, here's what the building's going to look like. It's just sample. Here's the Great Hall. Some of the same stuff is ported over. Here's what rooms can look like, and here's some characteristics of those rooms. And then the actual ask, so the Getting Gear, I always had this concept. I wanted something for our donor wall where it was interactive with the kids somehow. And I had this thought about, you know, kids turning gears, and more or less to show that smallest gear moves the biggest gear and vice versa. And did some Google searching and found the Kentucky Science Center had something similar. So thanks to them, they let us use their photo. But you can see we made all of our asks around the different gear levels and stuff like that. So so we're excited for that wall to go up, and hopefully there will be no pinched fingers or anything, depending on how they build that. So that was pieces of our public phase of our capital campaign. And you can find all of this on our website as well, kidscan.org, if you want to steal anything. For campaign structure, I wanted to share this. We didn't really have necessarily a steering committee. It was mostly made up of myself and our leadership team and the board. Other campaigns have been successful using a special committee or committee chairs or honorary chairs to kind of really lead, especially the major gift campaign. A number of reasons we weren't able to do that, and it's kind of during COVID, and it wasn't easy to do one-on-one meetings and have them be kind of what we want to do, or have parties and stuff like that to talk about the campaign. So we did our best, but I wanted to share this as well as an example. So gift ranges, and I think we're all pretty familiar with gift charts, and this is something similar. This is kind of recommendations on how much your lead gift should be and kind of your lead gift and major gifts, mid-range gifts at different percentages. And so we did an exercise as we were establishing our campaign. And this was my gift chart at the time. So at that time, we were looking about a 12.4 million campaign. And you can see that, I wanted one lead gift at 3 million and 4 at 1.5 and so forth, kind of on down. But they also, it's kind of a semi-formula of like, how many prospects do I need to have to get that lead gift or to get that 1.5? And so you can see number of prospects is pretty high. And granted, some can fall kind of in either range, but it was helpful for me is like, do we even have the ability to do this or approach this many people? And so I did some manipulating and stuff like that. And we did kind of right sizing our budget down to about 11.5 or 11.3, I think, at that time. But you can see the majority, the top 9 gifts make up 88% of the budget. So in Omaha, I think we're pretty lucky that we have a lot of foundations that give major gifts. But I would also say all these other gifts take 6 times as much time to kind of close that gap. And so that's really important. So I also want to kind of share our actual gift chart year to date. So you kind of see, it looks a little different. Obviously, we have some ranges. So, we have our 1 lead gift, a couple at the million, at the 1.5 million, and so forth, kind of on down as we're still continuing to fundraise. But you can see it kind of still working out, our top 9 gifts here made up 95% of our budget. However, all of this takes a lot of time to meet with all those actual individual donors and stuff like to kind of begin to fill the gap. So I wanted to share that as well. All right, so this is kind of a pop quiz time. So this is a test for campaign readiness. And so we're gonna get through this pretty quickly. You'll have all this information as well. So if you have a piece of scratch paper or something or Excel, we're gonna do, it's a 1 through 12. The questions are weighted a little bit. Let me get through. We'll stop on each of these, but I just kind of want to share. So some have up to 15 points, some have up to 10 points, and some up to 5 points. And so we're just going to quickly do this and just kind of see where you're at on the campaign readiness. So if we're ready, we'll kind of get going on this. So sound plan for the future. So this would be up to 15 points. Do you have a strategic plan that's over the next 3 to 5 years? Does the plan have your mission statement, specific goals? Is the board involved into this? Has the board committed themselves to meeting financial needs to make sure this happens? So I'll give everybody a few seconds to write down the first number that comes to your head. And like I said, you will have all this later to kind of make a decision. And I would recommend doing this with your board or leadership team so you can see how everybody falls in these different areas to see how they're doing. So that was number 1, up to 15 points. Number 2, lead gift prospective donors. Up to 15 points. Do you have the ability to give the attention to identify and cultivate those major donors for support, as well as special projects? We're all used to kind of normal fundraising. This is a little bit different. Have you compiled that list into kind of donors, major gifts, foundations, and so forth? Up to 15 points here. All right, number 3, capable, qualified executive staff. Again, depends on the day for me. I don't know where I fall sometimes in this. Does the CEO have a clear grasp of the vision for the future? I hope so. Can they articulate that vision? How is their perception, in the community? Do they have the respect of the board, the senior staff? Are the financiers well understood? And is that person able to move the organization to the next level? I think with any campaign, you are naturally moving your organization to the next level rather than just treading water to the same place. Otherwise, why would you be doing a capital campaign? All right, that's up to 10 points there. Moving on to number 4, capable volunteer leadership. Is it self-evident that causes don't raise money, that people with causes raise money? You can't just know that infant childcare is important. You need somebody to champion that cause or whatever it happens to be. Have you actively involved your volunteer leadership? And so sometimes I read this and I'm really talking about the board or other parts of your team to help you raise that money required. One thing to think about is that this capital campaigns are on top of your normal job. So you don't magically have an extra 40 hours a week to dedicate towards capital campaigns. So you do need to, 1, carve out time, and 2, make sure the labors and volunteerism is distributed. So number 4 is up to 10 points. Number 5, involved, concerned, and governing board. Are board members willing to give and ask others to give? This is an important question. This is, like I said earlier, a larger ask that I wasn't used to asking for big numbers. Our board was not used to that, but once the excitement has kind of gone or spread about the project, it made that a little bit easier. So out of 10 points, involved, concerned, governing board. Moving on to number 6, history of gift support. Does your organization have experience in attracting large gifts for annual funds, capital purposes, or an endowment? We did not, and I kind of scored ourselves a little bit low on this, but we had gotten better at raising money for major gifts. So this is out of 10 points. All right, halfway there. The last 6 questions can be developed during the campaign or kind of during that planning period. So the others are kind of like, are you ready? Kind of get to the starting point, and then we'll move on. So number 7, do you have a positive reputation or track record? Does your organization have a history of success? Do you have a balanced budget for the past 5 years? If you have 2 years where you're ending in the red, funders will look at that. That might not be the right time, or they might not have the confidence to invest in you for a capital campaign. And of course, are you well regarded in the community serves? Are programs considered high quality and necessary? So up to 5 points here. Moving on to number 8. This is kind of a little bit of a repeat question. Capable qualified development staff. Sometimes this is 1 person per organization. Sometimes this is 0 persons. This is still the executive director. Do you have, because that the time and energy to dedicate fundraising to this, because it is a lot of time to be able to do that. If not, is it something that could be outsourced, or do you have that ability to do that? So up to 5 points here for development staff. Moving on to number 9, compelling case for support. As you know, ours was kind of developed a little bit along the way. Has the case for the raising funds needed to been written? When I first took this test, no, it had not. You know, we were still kind of figuring that out, but we had pieces of it about to come together. Making sure it's understood by staff, volunteers, your board, funders, and can staff and the board express the case in exciting terms. So if there's, I always say, if there's a little bit of haziness, that's not going to help anybody. That you need to know that in and out and be confident in what you're asking for. So up to 5 points here for number 9. 10 is a prospective donor development plan and research system. So are you able to identify the potential givers and contact them, and kind of all the stuff that comes with it? So we had some okay system, I should say. Like a lot of people, we still depend on Excel and different spreadsheets rather than Bloomerang or whatever it happens to be. But we did look at those, and so like, who out of our major funders, who are we going to ask at these kind of larger levels? So part of it is kind of beginning to kind of figure that out. Another thing we did with our former development person is she really dug into different individuals to do some I'd say wealth checks to kind of see how much they have potential for giving based on kind of a number of different things. So when you make a specific ask that are we going to ask this person for $10,000? Are we going to ask this person for $20,000? Kind of trying to know as much ahead of time of what their ability to give is. So this is number 10 out of 5 points. Number 11, creative functioning communication programs. I think functioning is the key word for me here. That sometimes we have good plans, but we don't actually use them. So part of it is like, this is kind of the tools of the trade for the capital campaign. Yeah, how are you going to actually communicate with these people? Lots of different elements here. So this is something that you may not have kind of right at the beginning during the campaign, but something you need to develop as you get closer to launching the public phase. And finally, number 12, an efficient record keeping system. So there's a lot more moving parts for this. And when I think about on, let's say, foundation side, some foundations will pay you up front, some will pay you after you move in, some will split it over years. Individual donors may pay, monthly over the course of 3 years. So there's a lot of moving pieces, kind of more than usual, that you need to kind of figure out that you'll be able to track and kind of tally as you go along. And as well as making sure that should go without saying that you acknowledge all those contributions within 2 days of getting the receipt. So that was number 12 up to 5 points. So this kind of shows you out of a total possible 100 points over those, you can do quick math. So they indicate a score below 75 that you're not quite ready to mount a major campaign. You should kind of work on those elements for lower scores. So that's kind of, I would call that a hard line in the sand, but this is something I think it's a helpful tool to do with your leadership team or do with your board to kind of see where you're at and say, you know what, we are really struggling and the lead gift for prospective donors would happen to be like shore that up and kind of make sure that we're ready for that. So, and like I said, I think it would be interesting to do it with, give this either survey monkey to all your board members or your leadership teams to see how everybody thinks they're landing in these different areas as well. So, all right, so I think I'm just at my end mark. So I want to share a couple things. So a lot of this was taken from the Indiana University Lilly Family School Philanthropy. So there's that website and recommend checking that out. And then you have my contact information as well. So I know, Rosie, you're going to be sharing all of this information as well. So I will stop sharing here.
Excellent. Excellent. So can everybody hear me? I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties over here. Okay. So that's fantastic. So Abby is on, she's going to be monitoring the chat for us. So we are going to enter the panel portion of our time together today. We've got some great panelists on. I've got a few questions prepared to just kind of get the conversation started. But if you have questions, please drop them in the chat and Abby is going to monitor those for us. So first, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panelists. First of all, thank you, Robert. That was a fantastic presentation. I don't think any of us were prepared to do math, but I appreciate the opportunity to get my brain going this morning. And with that, I'm excited to welcome our panelists. We have Hindery, CEO at NAM, Emiliano Lerda with the Paul G. Smith and Associates, John Levy with William and Ruth Scott Family Foundation, Carolina Padilla with the Intercultural Senior Center, and Jaymes Sime with the Child Saving Institute. Thank you and welcome to our panelists. So let's start with, you know what? Let's start with Jaymes. Jaymes, if you could point to a couple things that made your campaign successful, that contributed the most to your capital campaign success, what do you think they would be?
Well, I mean, not to be too simplistic, it's like most things in life, I think persistence. I think you're going to have many times where you question whether you should, can, will. And so I think to Robert's presentation, having that case statement, having everybody believe in that. And so I think, but just persistence, you're going to have so many different obstacles on the fund development side when the project kicks off as you're navigating those challenges. So being persistent. And if you're leading the organization and leading the campaign, people are looking to you for your confidence in whether it can all be executed in the way that you say. So be persistent.
I love it. Thank you. Do any of the other panelists have anything to add?
Yeah, so what I would say is persistence was the first word that came to mind as well. So there must be something there, but also a great team with you, because as you are paying a lot of using a lot of your time to focus on raising funding and doing what needs to be done, checking all the boxes. Robert, by the way, that was an amazing presentation and very useful, very practical application. So thank you. And I do want to give a lot of credit to the rest of the team that I had to work with, because during that time, I was not really able to pay as much attention to the internal operations, and there was a solid team that I was working with. So that a solid team, and then trust, having the trust with key relationship with key funders, where you will screw up at one point or another, and having that trust for somebody to pick up the phone and say, hey, I have to share with you, I received this feedback. You came in too strong, or you represented a gift as a lead gift, but it wasn't, and technically, and therefore, and so having those kind of lines of communication and having the humility to receive that feedback, and not get all defensive, but then figuring out how to manage that. So I would say persistence, a solid team with you, and then trust with the key funders.
Thank you, Emiliano. Anybody else? Anything to add?
I would just echo what Emiliano said about the team, and especially, I mean, we're a bit smaller than Kids Can, and did a much smaller capital campaign, but without the support of the rest of the staff, and especially, I'm going to give a shout out to Abby Hughes. She breathed capital campaign and coordinated the move and did all the logistics, and I don't know how we would have gotten anything done. So just wanted to publicly thank Abby there.
Thanks, Abby. Any of the other panelists have anything to add there? Okay. Well, oh, Carolina, you look like you're about, Carolina, you're still muted, it looks like.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah. So I believe that, I mean, we are not, I'm going to speak a little bit for in general as organizations. We come to an unknown, different world when we do capital campaigns. Or at least that was what happened to us. A small organization, but with the need of doing a capital campaign to find a home. But I think that most importantly is the relations you build or you bring from years. They make stronger. They ask the why for a capital campaign. And of course, you need to have a good team and good support from the board that truly believe in the need of what you're trying to do. So that's very helpful. But I think I don't think there is any that comes already with a mind clear, or this is all the steps that need to be followed. At least somebody else has done it already a few times, that you become kind of like an expert, what you did right, what you did not do right. But you learn, you learn so much, and what you do right or you do not do right. And I think that's what helps to move forward. You of course, if it wasn't for the mayor gifts that you get from foundations, it's impossible. At least in our case, that's what it was. But I think that building that foundation from previous years, that helps a lot. So as much as you can do from them, and then the rest is like Robert was explaining, how you have to keep that door open to others, not necessarily big donors, but even small donors, and kind of see where their where they fit into all the different needs that you have when you're building on that. So that's my input.
Thank you, Carolina. So John, I would be interested to hear you, because you have kind of a 30,000 foot view, so to speak, of many different campaigns that happen. I would love to hear if there's any sort of like common threads that you see among the most successful capital campaigns that you've seen around.
I would say if the common threads I see, frankly, are what's already been said a lot, which is I think persistence is key. And I think making sure you're actually doing the work right now. And what I've seen of the ones that have failed is there's this dependence on a few donors to make the campaign happen. And frankly, I would say, at least from the peer funders I talk to, it's endlessly frustrating to them to hear just, oh, we expected you to fund our whole thing. It speaks really well of an organization when they go out and get not the usual suspects, right? And if you're outside of Omaha, having your local buy-in's huge, right? For the Scott Family Foundation, they do fund statewide, but if you don't have local community support, it's hard for us to think that the local community wants it. We realize some of the big dollars are probably going to come from us and others, but really making sure that you've done that work to get, to us, I would say like, it still stands out to me, the Big Garden, they, one of the first things they did is they actually approached all their small donors. And then they went to the major foundations and said, hey, look how many individuals we have that believe in our campaign. It was small in the amount of money it contributed. I think they had somewhere in the neighborhood of like 130 donors contributing less than the Scott family ended up providing, but that 130 donors spoke really well to us. So that's huge. And what I see in the chat about peer support's huge because some foundations don't give you really honest feedback. And so getting feedback from others, and also just to commiserate or frankly to bitch about foundations and how we're unreasonable and things like that. I think that's huge. But I'd encourage people to, uncover every sort of revenue you can, because frankly, I want organizations to be able to tell me to go pound sand. But if we're too much of your budget or you're hoping on us too much, you can't really do it. And that includes if there's public dollars available, you should absolutely go after every single public dollars. It's hard to go and tell a foundation you need a lot of money, but you didn't want to go and pursue those government dollars, or you didn't want to go to work and find those small donors. It's showing us, are you just looking for an easy way out? But that's why peer support is huge, because like I said, you might be upset that we tell you that.
Thank you. That's excellent. I appreciate everybody's input. So, Anne, we're going to start with you. If you could point to one thing that you would do differently next time, and I know you kind of hope that there's never a next time, but if there was, what might you do differently?
Yeah, I hope there is never a next time. I've only done one and learned a lot, and was really surprised about stuff I didn't know until I was right in the middle of it. But the one thing I would have done differently is hire a project manager sooner. We actually started our capital campaign. Initially, we just needed to move our office. We outgrown our space. And when we moved to our old space, we did it internally. And I was naively thinking we could do that again this time, but we'd grown. And so we were just looking at space. And then finally, a foundation said, you need to talk to, somebody that can manage the process for you. And that was really helpful, because they really helped us determine how much square footage do we need. Let's look at locations. My goal when we started looking as far as location was to have the best qualities of our space on center, which was easy parking, easy access to the interstate, and lots of room for training, which, spoiler alert, we will be doing in-person training in 2022. So you'll get to see our lovely space. So that's one thing I wish I would have reached out. I probably wasted a good 4-6 months easy thinking we could do it all the details ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Carolina, what about you? Is there anything you might do differently if you have to do this again?
Well, I'm like in, oh my gosh, another capital campaign. Every time I think about it, it's like, oh my goodness. It's seriously, it's very stressful. I
Yeah.
mean,
Drink more.
you don't sleep, you wake up in the middle of the night, you know, it's, oh my goodness. But it's worth it, you know, at the end of the day, it's so worth it. But yeah, I think making sure that you have to have a project manager, but making sure the person you hire really has the skill sets to help you out. Because we had the experience that we have to switch, we had to change the one that we hired at the beginning, and that kind of push that back, you know, in the project. Because it kind of loses track of what is happening, what's going on, and then there's mistakes that can happen later where the project manager that you hire at the end might say it was not on my time. And so just, you know, just make sure, you know, take your time to find the person and making sure that person is going to go all the way with you to the end and really help you to save that in a goodwill and not just give you more than what you really can take. That's the experience that we had. Of course, we because we changed it, but the project manager that we hired later, you know, so happy with him. He really cared, and so help us through the final project. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Did any of our other panelists have anything to add about lessons learned, or, oh my goodness, please don't do this, don't make the same mistakes I did?
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons learned.
Oh, we've only got 45 more minutes.
Okay,
but-
Rosie. But I would tell you about one big mistake, and it's a real like communication issue, I would say. We had one site originally identified, and we had what I understood as a lead gift. And what is a lead gift? Typically, not always, but typically you would think of the biggest and the first gift. And I characterize a gift from a local foundation as a lead gift, even after we changed sites with their permission. But their permission was not affirmative. Their permission was like, sure, you can use our money for the new project and the new site. But what I did not clarify is whether or not I could continue to characterize that as a lead gift. And so be ultra careful on clarifying how you're characterizing somebody's gift. So yeah, send a quick email and say, here's how I plan to talk about your gift, because it does influence how it comes across to the next funders that you're talking to. And that person or the foundation is definitely going to get a phone call. And if they're not under the impression that they're lead gift and they get a phone call from another funder and say, hey, I hear you're the lead gift, it can cut them off guard and it can produce a little bit of tension there. And so just be careful in how you characterize gifts and make sure to keep that lines of communication open with the funders.
I think that's a fair point. The thing I would say actually is don't give your architect carte blanche. I oftentimes see people not giving a budget to an architect, and I can't tell you how many meetings I come with where it is gorgeous plans. I mean, but then it's like, well, you got to raise the money for it now. And so it's like having an idea of what you think you might be able to raise. I mean, I just met with an organization who gave me they're like, we want to meet in person. They gave me all these renderings, and they're like, and I was like, that's great. Now, how are you gonna raise that much money from your donor base? It's an organization with a $200,000 a year annual budget that wants to raise over 30 million. And so I think really giving your architect a clear idea of this is how much money we want to stay within, because otherwise, the truth be told, it's like, well, when, my wife recently went car shopping, and when they put you in the fancy car first, all the other cars seem a lot less appealing. And so I would say start with the base model and then go from there. And so, yeah, it's a frequent thing. And I would say, I would not assume that just because you have a project managers can be great, but those project managers also aren't always worried yet about how much money you can raise. And so giving them an idea, I mean, because it's ultimately going to fall on you, the organization, not on the project manager, not on the architect. The project manager will hopefully help you keep that budget. But I mean, Emiliano can say that for like his campaign, some of the unsexy things that he had to pay for, right? That he probably wasn't expecting to invest that much money into. So architects aren't going to tell you like, oh yeah, the HVAC, this is what you got to pay for the HVAC. And so just considering all those things in the mind, that would be where I'm seeing right now. There are so many capital campaigns, and part of the challenge with some of them is they've only invested with the architect.
I have a question for John, actually. Can I shoot a question?
Absolutely.
So John, one thing I observed, I was kind of the lead. I didn't have an honorary chair, somebody with a name and a foundation and that operates in that world to help us secure gifts. But I watch other nonprofits use that model, and I understand, Robert's presentation is like you can go different ways. Do you see a difference? I mean, maybe you can share with the group if you see that it's usually more successful if you have an honorary chair, or if there's a certain level of, if a campaign reaches a certain threshold, it's better for it to have an honorary chair that takes that on and have those peer-to-peer conversations with funders. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on where your money's coming from. Like, for example, let's talk, when you were doing Immigrant Legal Centers campaign, you had a relationship with all of your major donors. So you didn't really need an honorary chair. If you need new connections, then an honorary chair is probably going to make more sense for it. The one thing you have to be careful for is, let's say you need new connections. Let's say some organization that we've never connected with reaches out to us through their honorary chair, because we know their honorary chair. Most of the time, honorary chairs are people of significant wealth themselves. And so they better be making a very sizable contribution. You can't have like, and we see that sometimes people that have significant wealth that have never made those sorts of gifts, but they like bringing their friends on, we'll be like, oh, what's your level of support? We know you have the money. And so if you're going to use that honorary chair, that's great, but they better be prepared to make a gift and not just lend their name. If you're coming to, I would say, most foundations, but it's just, do you need new donors or not, is I kind of think where the honorary chairs kind of come into play, at least in my mind.
Thank you.
So Jaymes, I would be interested to hear if there's any thing you would do differently. If hypothetically you had to do a capital campaign again, what is there anything you might do differently?
Well, yeah, I feel like I've been in the spin cycle of campaign conversations for the rest of my life. But I think strategically, as I'm looking at it now, actually probably one of the things that I'm currently chewing on is figuring out cash flowing the front end of that project. I think you'll hear everybody, as soon as you can have project professionals involved that aren't, to John's point, selling you the Cadillac when you can do just fine with a 1990 Cutlass, like making sure that you have that team. And so that's the difficult balance. And I think there's a mixed belief whether you should take on any sort of debts, line of credit as a part of your campaign. So I think strategically laying that out, and if you have the donors that can come in early enough where you can bring the professionals on to advise the campaign, so you can start that process as early as possible. You in this environment, you can get into trouble really quick making assumptions about the cost of things, and you do that because you've been unable to secure the professionals because you haven't been able to cash flow that part of your campaign. And so that could have you looking really foolish going out, throwing assumptions out if you're having some initial conversations with funders. So I would really look at the front end of that campaign, how you're going to cash flow that first part, whether you call that the master planning, whether it's idea sessions. Some folks will give you, you know, maybe they'll offer some free services with the anticipation that they get involved in the project if it takes off. But make sure that you're locking or having a conversation about fee structure if that's the case as well. So not that anybody's trying to get one over on you, but everything costs money and these professionals are incredibly busy. So if they're committing anything like that to you, make sure you're just asking those questions. And so cash flowing the front end is something I think if I could have had the team involved earlier, that's what I would have done. In the future, which is now.
The future is
that's
now.
That's what I'm trying to do, because costs are so darn high. And so you got to make sure that you're testing all of that.
Mhm. Excellent.
Yeah,
Nice.
pricing is a problem everywhere right now. Getting pricing and people to give you a bid and sticking to it because there's so much change happening so quickly.
I see Katie asked a question about what makes a good project manager. You know, I would say to me, one of the easiest things to do is ask the project manager for references, but also references where they might not have finished the job. You know, because a lot of project managers have been removed from jobs, and I actually think it's good to find out why they're removed, because not always it's not always their fault, and I think that can become clear. But to me, what makes a good project manager, the reason I know of a project manager that's been let go of twice recently, and it was a lack of responsiveness, right? Like, this project is so important to you. If you feel like you are 6th or 7th on their list, and it takes a week to find out things, like, they're not living and breathing this like you are. And you want to know that they're truly focused. So I mean, I don't want to advocate for just using smaller ones, but some of the time, because some of the bigger ones, they do give you that individual personalized service, but just making sure, like, I know with Roberts and him using like Sam Garden at CBRE, I mean, the amount of times I would see Sam where he was talking about, Kids Can's, campaign, and how it was going, and he wasn't even needing to be involved yet. But there's plenty of good project managers, but I mean, having one that's responsive and you feel like truly cares about you will put you at ease a lot more. But I'd ask for references, both good and ones that they didn't finish.
Mhm.
And I got a question directly, but I think it's for
Thanks, Robert.
everybody about how do you choose an owner's rep? And so we there's owner's rep or architect or what have you, it was a RFP process, and they made sure the board members, not the entire board, was involved. So otherwise, this is not the Robert show. And then we also wanted to involve other people that knew more than me, and same thing, that we interviewed them, we called their references. And then this is where I go back to your peer network, because I'm like, hey, Carolina, I know you worked with so-and-so. What was it really like? And, what would you recommend or not recommend? Or is there certain, within that firm, is there somebody specifically that you would like to work with, that you've had experience with? So that's kind of our process. If you reach out to me, I'm more than happy to share our RFPs that we used at the time, but that was kind of the general process. That way, the burden wasn't all necessarily here, and I had other eyes on it as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in. I think another benefit of a good project manager, definitely for us, I realized early on, I don't speak construction very well. And so to have somebody that could translate, what that meant, and then the cost, and getting that all framed up for both the construction and the architect was really helpful for us.
So,
I was
thank
all
you.
playing acronyms during meetings, like, what is that?
Carolina, you had originally brought up the making sure you've got a project manager that knows your organization and knows what they're doing. Do you have anything to add to the comments about a good project manager, or how you pick one?
Well, I think it's the project manager kind of represents you how the project is going. And it's, like Ann was saying, we don't know all the language they use. So it's kind of like, okay, so what it is. But one of the things that I was advised was just to be present on a daily basis in my project and just ask questions. And I think the project manager that I had, that's one of the things that he helped me out was because I will go back and forth with him and say, I was in such room this day. And I mean, what is it they're doing that? Or, what's happening here? And I don't understand much, but can you ask or explain? Or, and he was pretty good in keeping communication with me. So that's a key. When you don't hear from your project manager in 1 or 2 days, it's like, oh my gosh, what's going on. So you have to have very good communication and, understand sometimes there is, things that happen, but for most of the time that I had a good experience at the end about that communication. And I think that you have to really show your interest in the project, even though you don't know that language. Because having the project manager doesn't mean they have an eye on 20, like 8 hours, 10 hours a day. And that's why it's so important to go. I never forget that there was a day when I came and I was in the bathrooms and they were kind of finishing the bathrooms and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I recall that we had tile in the bathrooms. Why is just the drywall? So I asked the subcontractor and they're like, we're just following here directions. And so I contacted the project manager immediately. And I said, I think there's a mistake here. You need to come like right away because I need tile in my bathrooms. So he showed up, he came and he said, what's going on? I said, I don't about plans. I don't know much about it, but I just remember. And of course you cannot remember everything, but there's certain areas. And yes, they made a mistake. So they had to remove the drywall and put the tile in the bathrooms. So, but I think that if my project manager will not be so good in communication with me and feel comfortable in the back and forth, it wouldn't probably kind of pass and would have been a big mistake later. But I think that he made me, that's when I realized I really need to be present and not just put it on the hands of some other person, even though you don't know the language, but at least you know what's happening in your project in every area that you have, and ask the questions.
Yeah. Like you may not know the language, but you know the difference between drywall and tile. So
exactly.
Yeah. Absolutely. So just a note, make sure you're either putting questions in the chat or we've got a manageable enough size of crowd that you can also just unmute yourself and ask your questions if you have them. Don't leave this time. We've got about a half an hour left together. Don't leave this time with a question because we've got plenty of time together and plenty of space for your questions.
Rosie, this is Kelly. I have a question that you're going to love.
Kelly.
This is kind of for John and Emiliano. The assumptions made prior to getting to this point that the nonprofit leader has collected all of this program data and has done all this program evaluation on the data, and they've analyzed their space and they know from the data and the programming that we need to move forward with the capital campaign. John and Emiliano, do you see organizations that come to you and don't have that data, or a major funder said, hey, I want to give you money for a larger facility, but there's really no need? And how do you handle that?
I'll let John talk because I'm really not very involved in the philanthropic side of Paul and Annette. So I don't see that a lot, but I know from Paul and his own fundraising efforts, but I'll let John talk to that. But thanks, Kelly. Good to see you, by the way.
I call it the WCA effect. WCA, in Omaha got really nice space. In greater Nebraska, it's the Red Cloud effect. They had a really nice early childhood center. And so I think what we're seeing is a lot of people see other organizations with nice space and you want to keep up with the Joneses. So a lot of times it isn't even programmatic arguments for why they need the space. It's they want nicer space. Look, every organization is increasing the number of people they serve. So every organization can make the argument that they need it. To me, what I'm more curious about is, can you raise it? So I think everyone should be able to make a programmatic argument for it, but unfortunately, just the sheer number of campaigns out there and the size of the campaigns is going to really make certain ones. I think how certain winners are going to be picked is not on the programmatic need. It's because at the Scots, for example, if we make a $5 million pledge on a $100 million campaign or a $10 million pledge, that's only 10% of the way there. And if they can't raise that additional 90 million, we have $5 or $10 million committed to a project that has no chance of actually happening. And so I say, you know, I like to look at Emiliano. One of the things that he did so well on his was he kept his campaign reasonable. And I think when you keep your campaign reasonable in size, honestly, it's a lot more appealing because we know that you're going to get there. So it's not like, you know, Carlina did the same way, Robert did the same thing, right? And so we didn't have to cross our fingers and hope that the campaign would actually happen, because we are a funder that will come in a little bit earlier. But if you start doing these big campaigns, we're probably, no one wants to be the first one in because it can hold up the dollars. In the same way, you know, if you're relying on a couple of funders, you better be sure that they're being honest and transparent, because if they're kind of selling you upriver behind the scenes, or saying, well, we don't like this, or they don't give you as much as you wanted, you know, they're probably telling us, well, we saw a programmatic need for this, and that's why we want to support it, but we don't really like it. So that doesn't make us want to do something big either. So making sure whoever your major donors are, your lead gift, that they're a good behind the scenes spokesperson for you. But to your point, Kelly, I think right now everyone can probably make a programmatic need. Many are not, because they just assume that they can, or they cite a couple stats and then they move on for it.
I also just want to add something. There's a different dimension to the answer that to your question, Kelly. That is, you also know your program, but know your donors, and that some of the larger gifts and some of the larger projects become a little bit of a legacy project for a particular person or donor. And so that can also be part of that equation when you're doing the analysis. And at that level, then you have to know, are they going to be your lead gift, and what are they going to come in at? So I'm reflecting a little bit on what I saw happen when I know Paul was leading efforts to raise money for the Jocelyn. I mean, that was a huge campaign. And so with the WCA example that John shared, you know, there are people that see that as, this is what I helped build in this community, and this is their legacy gift. So that's also important to understand. If your organization has that kind of long-standing relationship with somebody of that stature, now they're going to be expected to give quite a bit, like John was saying. But know that if you have that the luxury of having that kind of buy-in from certain high net worth individuals.
Thank you. Okay, excellent. If you have any questions, feel free to just shoot them in the chat or call them out or whatever. But I'd love to hear what in your capital campaigns you found the most challenging and how you learned to work around it. So let's start, I don't know, Robert, would you like to chime in? Like, what was a primary challenge that you saw, and how'd you learn to kind of work around that?
I think my primary challenge is kind of, at what point are we launching this? You know, like, and then John will probably say I felt like I was dragging my heels here, but I wanted to have a successful campaign. So I felt like I could very well just jump in the deep end of the pool and say, hey, our building was built in the 60s. We need a new building. But I kind of wanted to make sure I had all my ducks in the row. So you kind of start our elongated timeline where we had a facilities assessment and then growth strategy report, just so I guess I wanted not only prove to funders, but prove to myself, hey, this is what we need to do, and this is how kind of the future could be laid out. So that was probably for me, kind of the most difficult thing to navigate. And then once I get going, it's a totally uncharted waters everywhere you turn. So everything kind of seems difficult at the time, but I think that for me, that was kind of moving over that. And once I kind of go over that kind of hump, things kind of felt a little bit smoother.
One thing, Robert, that you did do that I would say I think is a challenge that a lot of people run into is controlling their own message. Like, look, I just wrote down a list in Omaha alone. There's going to be that I wrote down social service agencies. There's 44 different campaigns happening or going to happen. Now, even if you haven't talked to us, the major funders in this community all talk to each other. And so there's one campaign, for example, where I haven't heard from the organization directly, but I will tell you funders behind the scenes are like calling each other up, being like, can you believe how big this campaign has gotten? And they're all talking about without any of them having really direct contact. So everyone's kind of riling each other up. And I think that happens with a lot of campaigns. Or you hear, they're not going to go after these dollars. Can you believe that? Like, so I think you just want to get out there and kind of control your message. So like Robert, when he's talking about when do we launch, he's communicating with, others. Here's where we kind of stand, here's where we are in our process, I know Carolina did kind of the same thing with her campaign, and, here's what we're looking at. So just trying to control your message, I think it's a huge thing.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything to contribute?
Well,
this time?
since
Thanks,
I've been
Jaymes.
in a perpetual planning process for the rest of my life, I will say programming an existing space, to John's point earlier, versus a space that you're maybe starting from the ground up. I think it is very important to pay attention and set those parameters with architects. I will also say, since pricing, to Emiliano's comment, is so inflated right now, I think it's important, and I think it's perfectly acceptable to question, and normally maybe not in a normal environment, not acceptable to question how they're baking their fee structure. But if we're paying because the lumber and steel is 25% more expensive, doesn't mean that the architect or the contractor is putting in 25 to 30% more work. So I think it's perfectly acceptable in this environment, and it's prudent for donors' dollars to ask how our contractors and professionals are accounting for inflation in their fee structure. So it can't just be same process. Otherwise, they're making a lot of hay, and some of them are. And so I think that's on all of us. And yes, hopefully our owners reps are doing that, but I know I'm actively involved in conversations around that very specific things that makes people very uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, these resources aren't unlimited. There is a lot of good work trying to happen. And I think that's really our task. So even if you don't know, we know, everybody knows and sees what's happening in this environment. And again, if you're still getting one professional on the job, then you shouldn't be paying X amount of dollars more just because lumber has gone up. So they have got to be accounting for that. And I think it's our, and if they don't, right, and you can't figure that out, then is it a prudent time to be doing a capital campaign? And that's something tough to chew on. I know we all have aspirations, but it is an environment that's difficult out there. Conversely, is it going to come back down to reality, and what is the new reality? That's also a fair conversation. But projecting out to 2024, 2025, not a lot of people see a daylight where things are changing. So there is kind of a new reset. Things are going to be more expensive in the near term, the shorter long term, but ask the questions and have them sit on that, have them come back with an answer. I don't know what that looks like, but I know I've asked the questions and they get real uncomfortable.
Katie asked, can you discuss what the owner's rep is? And I work with owners reps in my capacity now with Paul and Paul G. Smith and Associates. And the owner's rep will help you from the beginning, kind of do the assessment, so programmatic assessment for the space needs, and help you kind of manage the relationship with the architects, the general contractors, and subs. Basically, they get a lot of pricing for you. They manage those relations. They know how to speak the language, and they translate all of that to you. So you have somebody who knows how to hold people accountable and hold people to a budget, for example, and they help you be all inclusive of what all should be in the budget, because maybe you are forgetting key elements, like John was saying earlier, maybe the HVAC system needs to be replaced, and that's a huge piece. And there's a significant lead in waiting for that in a cost. So they help you with the timeline, budget, and managing those processes. And then when the construction starts, they help you kind of keep everybody on task and hopefully as close to on time as possible. That's in a nutshell, I would say, an owner's rep. And I think a lot of foundations realize that it gives them a lot of peace of mind to know that there's somebody who knows how to manage a project like that. And they also can help you, particularly, actually, also they can help you think about, if you're thinking about applying for TIF, some owners reps will help you with that and understanding that world, tax increment financing that you could potentially get for your project from the city, or any other kind of government programs and grants and funds that you could potentially apply for, permits, etc. So they're really helpful, a helpful partner. Now, back to another question that was asked earlier, I think it's important to know that it's your project, and at the end of the day, don't forget and make sure that the owner's rep is also going to, this is still that you are going to have the imprint. You are going to have basically the ultimate say on what the project is and should be.
Thanks, Emiliano.
Ask a follow-up about that. Could you or someone else describe sort of the difference between the owner's rep, the project manager positions, and general contractor?
I can start, but I mean, I think you may get different answers from everybody because, oftentimes even here in my office, we talk about, well, the owner's rep, but in some worlds, people are like, what is owner's rep? And then we say, it's like a project manager. So it can be one and the same. Sometimes it can be used interchangeably, but I don't know. In my view, an owner's rep is a little more global and what they do for you, and a project manager would be a little more narrowly focused on a specific work stream. So the owner's rep will manage the entire budget, of the entire project. And maybe a project manager you deploy for a specific task within, the budget, if you will. That's my interpretation of that. But I'll, maybe John has more experience in working with more, and Robert and Jaymes, Carolina.
I think you did a good job summing it up. The general contractor I look at is the owner's rep is really the one, acting on your true behalf, and guiding you and making sure that your experience. The general contractor I look at as being much more in line with the construction company. So they're not, they're making sure this gets done. But, the owner's rep is because you might need your hand held a little bit more. No, I doubt anyone here has been doing construction their entire lives the way a construction company. So the owner's rep should be assisting you, with that process. I know Jaymes brings up one of the owner's rep he used, even into Emiliano's point. They helped him, I think, with his phone system, as part of their project. So, they're helping you with all aspects of it. General contractors just, really trying to get this project done. Does that make sense?
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, those are all it. And to Robert's presentation about assessing where your team is, I will say, since I'm in this perpetual cycle, it really does depend on what the owner's rep has to offer, the value based on the capacity of your organization and your leadership team. So, now if I were to consider a project with the current organization, having a CFO with different capabilities and different levels of interest of being involved in the project, maybe managing that cash flow budget and those types of things are less of an owner's rep need for us. So maybe we would back off that request about what we would need from an owner's rep, and we would ask that their pricing correspond to what our needs were as an organization. So I think you got to really know what your team needs, but it's fair. You don't know what you need or don't know what these people are. So I would have conversations with them and about the things they offer, because everybody, again, I don't think anybody's ill intentioned, but they'll try to sell you the Cadillac version, but you might not need all of those things, but they do pay attention to other, like FF&E is another thing. Phones fall under that, right? I think that's an item that is frequently missed, the technology pieces and furniture pieces, and especially in this environment. I don't know, Robert, hopefully you got some furniture ordered so you can be in your facility by 2030.
Phones are a big thorn in my side right now, I'll tell you that. So you feel like that shouldn't be a big deal, but, and to give you an example that the owner's rep changes what they do during different levels, but now that the building's being built, so we meet on site bi-weekly with the architect, the construction management, and the owner's rep. So we're all on the same page, and as kind of John said, that I do ask them, like, you need to hold my hand through this because I don't get it, or what does this mean to our cash flow and stuff like that. So I go back to, like, you're paying them. So if they're not living up to your service, you need to tell them exactly what you want from them.
Excellent.
I need to get going. I apologize just a few minutes early, but thank you, everyone. Thanks, Rosie, for organizing it, and Nam for having me. Great to see everybody.
Thanks for joining us, Emiliano. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Miss you already.
I'll add one part is obviously these folks will do a lot. Pay attention to that fee structure and how they're billing you for services. So if an owner's rep is an hourly rate based on who's doing what, they'll do a lot. But you know, you've gone into the project and set a budget, and you could probably very easily have cost overruns on some of those. So again, I think Robert's point into Kelly's question earlier, making sure that you have the data, the assessments, generally know what you need. You can't plan for it all, but you can be very planful and mindful. Otherwise, you'll go to these people, they'll be very helpful. But when you get that invoice 45 days later, you could be surprised. I imagine there could be some significant cost overruns if you're not quite sure what, when, how, and who you need to go to.
Think about the payment schedule too, because I've seen sometimes where some owners reps have asked for pretty significant prepayments, and then the nonprofit has not ultimately ended up very happy with the services provided by that owner's rep. But then they feel like, well, we already paid them 40 grand, and you know, they've only done this little bit of work, so they're hesitant to kind of eat that cost. So it's trying to figure out what what works for you, because to James's point, sometimes when they are billing you hourly, they can get high and you don't know what your costs are going to be. But is that better than a flat fee that you pay in advance? And so if you want to do the flat fee, just don't pay it all in advance. And I've seen that happen before, and then it gets tough to fire someone.
You know, and when we got to the point that we were having the regular meetings with the contractor, architect, and owner's rep, a portion of each of those meetings, Abby and I talked with the owner's rep to go over the budget. Like, where are we? So we could make sure that we weren't spending too much money in a certain area, or that, you know, this was unexpected, and so we could plan for it.
Thank you. This has been such a great discussion. And we have time for maybe one more question before we go to our closing question for our panelists. Does anybody have something that's burning that they'd like to get out before we move on?
Ian has his hand raised.
Oh, great. I'm sorry. I can't see anything. So thank you, Ian.
Rosie, we can just assume I screwed something up there, but here we are. So I'm probably alone on this panel asking this, but Robert, your passing grade was 75 on that test. I scored a whopping 29 on my self-assessment. My question is, for those of us who may not be at a capital campaign level yet as an organization, but nonetheless have facility needs that need to be addressed, what's the step between here and there? What's the next rung up if we're not at the top of that ladder?
Great question.
Gosh, that's a tough question. Because I will say there's a part of me that's just like, just do the capital now. If you got a couple of people that are pushing you to do capital and they have significant money behind you, just do the capital now, because we don't like getting peppered with, 3 requests over a short time. But if you don't have people that are going to contribute. So I think some of it's going to be based on, you know, willingness of your donors to support it. Because I've seen the reverse happen too, where some are like, we absolutely need new space. And it's like, well, that's great, but can you raise some money for that new space? And so I think a lot of it is, it stinks because I feel like funders shouldn't have as much influence or say on projects. It really is kind of a terrible dynamic that happens. But I remember when I was practicing law, someone told me the golden rule, and because I represented banks, and I was like, what's that? And they said, he who has the gold rules, or she who has the gold rules. And unfortunately, I think that is the driver of a lot of projects, is seeing that. So I would just be really frank with your donors and see, you know, whether you're thinking small, just, you know, a bridge project and their interest in that, or whether you're thinking big, because you can think big. And if people aren't behind it, I've seen some campaigns that have launched and they failed. I mean, just because you want it and you need it doesn't mean it ultimately happens. And some organizations have dissolved based on failed campaigns. They're kind of hard to recover from. I know that's scary to say, but I think that's why having those honest conversations ahead of time is so key.
Thanks, John. Robert, did you have anything to add?
I would say for us, also getting that lead gift early was a big boom for us, you know, because I'm like, all right, we have a huge investor, and then that helps other funders saying, hey, we already have this investor that's coming in as the lead, and kind of made the ask a little bit easier to say, because I can kind of feel like typically it can be the reverse, but sometimes, you know, after you get that big gift, everybody falls in line underneath that. Rarely is there somebody that say, hey, I want to be the new lead. So that's kind of part as well. But like, yeah, if you have funders interested now, and you have a good case, kind of like John said, that sometimes you can just jump into the deep end of the pool. But if you have it kind of laid out, here's how we're going to be successful.
And I'll just add it, Ian, kind of knowing the size of your organization, if you do have somebody who's interested, will they help support cash flow, those assessment, planning, phasing, feasibility studies? So you really know what you're talking and looking at as the leader of the organization. You know, are you talking $3 million, or really, to John's point, do you see over the next 5 years that you're going to have to find $20 million, and you don't want to go 3 different times to these same funders for different capital asks? So that might dictate the timing of when you're able to do it all. You hear people talk about phasing, and I don't know John's specific thoughts on this, but you know, if you're still talking over 5 years, on reasonable amount of money, what's the, you know, why phase it out? So I think you really earnestly have to look at those big picture capital needs. What do you realistically need? Can you realistically raise that, whether it's 5 or 10 years? Like, give an honest assessment. But if you have people willing, do that front end work. That's kind of what I was talking about, the cash flowing. That's the hardest thing, especially if you don't know what's what, is having the money to do that earnest assessment and costing the project out. And so if you have an investor that is willing to do that, that would be incredibly valuable.
Thank you.
You know,
If it helps to know, I know a number of foundations, us included, we forecast out our capital investments over 5 years. And so if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to ask for money, you know, in 3 years, that money might already be allocated because we're expecting a proposal to come in, you know, from something else. So sometimes it's hard to just say, I'm going to wait a couple of years and I'm going to those dollars might already be spoken for.
mm-hmm. And I mean, this is pretty basic, but one thing that we learned was, I wish I would have made a master list of when operating grants to foundations are due, because I can tell you when I'm not operating. I can tell you when operating and program grants are due, but when capital campaign grants, it was a whole different cycle. And so that definitely impacts things. And then like when they'll release, some won't release any funds until you have a certificate of occupancy. Some will earlier. And so just to kind of get that on a timeline, and I mean, we just used a basic Excel sheet. That's really helpful to help you understand your cash flow.
Thank you. So
I just want to add that
Yeah.
I don't know how the years that Ian's organization has been around, but you know, I recall wanted to do a capital campaign maybe 3 years before I did mine, or 2 years, and I guess I was too small for that. I think perhaps things have changed now, the fund in the foundations at that level. But, you know, I knew it as organization that my need was there, but I was not there yet for capital campaign. So we know we were not able to do it at that time, and we were planning and doing it. And it's kind of hard to find the perfect time because, you know, like John was explaining, they forecast like 5 years. And so you also, I guess now you have to start thinking, if that's the plan, you kind of have to kind of think it that way now, then, that if I am this kind of organization, where do I see myself in 2 or 3 years more to be able to come and ask for that much? And so in the meantime, just to continue to build that trust and that communication with funders. So when you come and do the ask, it becomes better, you know, for the organization. Instead of, I will do it in 2 or 3 years, but I'm going to keep myself and then ask. I think it's when you think, and you should start talking about it, so that way it doesn't come like a big surprise for funders too. So
Excellent. Thank you. Well, this has been great, and we have exactly 1 minute left. So Robert, you are the winner of the question, one closing piece of advice for our participants today.
Question on me, I don't know. And to kind of wrap up, you know, like involve all your stakeholders through the entire process, whether that's funders or board, advisory council, staff, or whatever, because it all has to, at the end, kind of mesh together. And to me, I probably would have done that even earlier. I think sometimes you're like, oh, let's figure it all out before we go to the foundation. And that's not always helpful, as kind of John alluded to. So that's kind of my biggest takeaway.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, everyone, we have come to the end of our time. If you have remaining questions, please email any of us here at NAM. We will either get you the information or funnel your question to one of our panelists. We have all kinds of resources available to you through the NAM network, through our members, through the National Council. So please, if you've got a question on your heart, don't hesitate to ask it, because the information is out there and we would love to get it to you. With that, this recording will be available soon. We will send it out to all registered participants. So it will be available to you. So be looking for that. Also be looking for a survey, as well as some follow-up materials for you. And again, thank you for joining us. It was wonderful to have you, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.